Well, recently an editorial piece appeared in the local Agassiz newspaper. That paper is part of a larger chain of newspapers called Black Press. And the author of the editorial piece talked about how the Yale Indian Band is on the verge of concluding a treaty with both Canada and the province of British Columbia on fish and land and other issues that the treaty takes up. The article suggests that the treaty will end the tensions and conflicts in the canyon over access to the fishery, especially the sockeye fishery, which is the big fishery. It suggests that reaching that treaty, that is involving Canada, British Columbia, and the Yale Indian Band, will bring these tensions and conflicts in the Stalo community over use and occupancy of that region of our traditional territory to an end. Our position is exactly the opposite will happen. If this treaty is concluded without there being a voice and influence and shaping of the treaty by all the Stalo communities who claim millennia-old links to the canyon fishery, that what will follow at the conclusion of this treaty, when it's inked, is a lot of conflict. Conflict in the courts, conflict on the fishing ground, conflict over traditional Aboriginal activities, Stalo activities such as berry picking, gathering traditional medicines in the region. Conflict will erupt over those things because the Yale Band, with a treaty in its possession, will be claiming some of the reserves that are there now that are in dispute. Whether or not these reserves belong to truly and only to the Yale Indian Band, or as the Stalos say, should really belong as a result of long-standing historical promises to the Stalo community generally. Well, that community, with its treaty in hand, will, we believe, seek to exclude Stalo people who are not members of the Yale Indian Band from their traditional fishing spots in the canyon, because those lands will be under the complete control and management of the Yale Indian Band. Those reserves are in the canyon and they extend down to the water line, and a lot of Stalo people fish up there. If the Yale Band is asserting management authority over those reserves up there, we're convinced that they'll attempt to exclude other Stalo from fishing up there. That will result in conflict on the fishing grounds, conflict that the government of Canada and British Columbia, the Yale Indian Band, will not want to see, and certainly conflict that the Stalo don't want to see, but will be left with no choice but to move to protect our interests in the canyon. There's always been tension between Stalo people over use of the canyon, but it became especially pronounced in the modern era, meaning over the last 3 to 4 decades. And that came about as a result of, especially in the past 20 years, as a result of the Yale Band Council claiming that the canyon fishery, the reserves there, are exclusively their territory. And they've also claimed that in the distant past, that before other Stalo, like Stalo people, not members of the Yale Indian Band, that they had to seek the permission of the Yale Band chief before they fished in the canyon. Well, we dispute that. It's simply not true. Stalo use of the canyon predates the Indian Act, predates the creation of Indian bands, and we never saw it. Our folks, never, our great-grandparents and our grandparents and our parents down to this generation, my generation, and even the generation after me, we've never sought the permission of any single band in the canyon, including the Yale Indian Band, to have access to our fishery. We've had access for 9,000 years or more to that fishery. That knowledge is broadly known in the anthropological community, the historical community. It's broadly known in our own community. It's broadly known by the earliest of explorers that came down the Fraser River, like Simon Fraser. But nevertheless, even at that early stage in the history of this province, non-Aboriginal observers took note that that canyon and the canyon fishery was shared in common with all of the Stalo people. Non-Aboriginal early explorers and settlers noticed that people from the lower valley would go up to the canyon and fish up there and share that area in common with one another, especially in the summertime as the sockeye were running. People would go up there, catch their sockeye, and cure them, wind dry them. They butcher the fish and hang them up in what are called dry racks, and the warm canyon air, sheltered from the sun and the breeze that blows up the canyon, would dehydrate the salmon and in that way preserve them. There wasn't refrigeration back then, so that was one technique our people used to cure their salmon and preserve their salmon for the coming winter. The Stalo Tribal Council has told both federal and provincial treaty negotiators and the negotiators for the Yale Indian Band that it's foolhardy to conclude a treaty with a band like Yale, a band that shares a common territory and fishing sites with other communities, that it's foolhardy to conclude a treaty that would stand to put all of these communities in conflict with one another, that it's not a wise idea to reach a treaty with an individual Indian band without regard to other communities in the region that share a common history, language, traditions, values, fishing places, and common family genealogies. That it's foolhardy to make a treaty with an individual Indian band without reference or regard to all the other Aboriginal communities in the region. And that's exactly what both the federal and provincial governments have gone ahead and done in the canyon. They're about to seal a deal with the Yale Band that will set Stalo off against Stalo for generations to come. And that's the tragedy of this, that's the foolhardiness of this, and that's why this treaty won't work.